I'll admit that Selection Project was a show that I had a lot of struggle with. It was an up and down roller coaster ride of, I don't know if I like this, oh, I don't like this, to, wow, this is pretty cool. And I always try to keep with it because, for one, I really like to cover a lot of idol shows. I do really enjoy a lot of underdog stories that they always kind of come out with. Additionally, you had Dogo Kobo working on the series as a multimedia project with them. I always loved Dogo Kobo. You had the character designer of Rent a Girlfriend, which admittedly, as much as I have issues with that show, I love the character designs. You had the director from Wataten. Like, so many good things was going for this show that I had to keep with it. And while again, I had my struggles with it, in the end, there was a lot of gold here. But this is my review of Selection Project, a 13-episode series that aired in the fall 2021 anime season, so let's jump into it. Selection Project early on follows a girl named Suzune, and we find out Suzune had been struggling with some sort of illness for a long time of her life. Always given the strength by this one idol named Akari. And Akari was this girl that essentially won the first Selection Project, which Selection Project is this idol reality TV show where different idols compete against each other for what they call yells or likes, and whoever gets the most of these yells will end up winning. And she won the first one of them. And again, she was such a good singer, and Suzune loved her singing so much, she became like a super fan, again, as she was stuck in this hospital. We'll jump forward in time. Suzune has had this kind of life-saving surgery. She ends up recovering, and then she decides she wants to go and become an idol, just like Akari was. And so yes, she decides to sign up for the next Selection Project. Well, unfortunately, the first competition, she fails miserably, but due to circumstances, she ends up getting into the Selection Project anyways. So she, along with 8 other girls, end up going to this Selection Project kind of beachside mansion where they all compete against each other in different competitions in order to see who ends up being the winner. And we have a large, very colorful cast of characters who end up all meeting at this location. You have Rena, who's the overly serious type. This is a, you know, you should be serious and this is all about the competition and we're all rivals, don't be friends with me kind of character. You have Nodoka, who's the more kind of I like to eat things, and she's more like a country bumpkin. Uta, who is a childhood star. Ao, who is more of a athletic, and so on and so forth. They all have their own kind of quirks that make them unique, and they're all competing in this one competition. And so what we get for this earlier segments of this show is this whole concept of meeting each of the characters, getting their quirks. There's no real kind of in-depth storytelling here, but you find out really quickly, despite this kind of being sold as a reality TV show, where all these girls are competing against each other, they very quickly turning it into your typical idol show. Everybody kind of gets grouped up into groups, so they're not really competing against each other directly. Through these groups, you're getting an idea of kind of some minor character development with each of the characters. You're getting this idea of what makes them tick, what makes them unique. Like, for example, Mako, she's more of the motherly type character. Everybody calls her like the mother of this certain dorm. And you find out that she has a lot of family members in her family, a lot of siblings. And so that kind of makes her a more nurturing character. But again, I do appreciate this kind of move for the storytelling because I don't want an episode for every single character because then you only get 3 episodes of the rest of the show, honestly. But I thought this was a great way of telling the characters because it doesn't require an episode for every character. Rather, you can group them up and develop them as a group. And I do really like that. At the same time, this isn't like really deep storytelling here, but they do have some really solid character moments. I especially liked Nagisa and Hiromi's whole kind of story arc. I thought it was really fantastic. But yes, this is when we get into developing Rena and Suzune, which, as many people would kind of point out, it's very similar to another show that aired this year. Yes, Idoly Pride, which is fine. I kind of mentioned it in a whole video I made on this whole idea. I don't necessarily think that it's like this sin that cannot be committed where you have a similar concept in another show. Yes, it's very similar, but there's a lot of differences here. And I think it's really in what they do with it going forward that makes it unique. And that's what Selection Project does nail. Despite it opening up with this very similar concept, in the end it did something I think even better. I guess to get it out there, between the two of them, they do 2 different things. Idoly Pride was so focused on Mana, this idol from the past, that I think it did something unique with that. Whereas I think this was more about Rena and Suzune and what they do in the future. One was stuck in the past, this one's stuck in the future. And I think, like I said before, because it did that so much more unique, it makes them both worth watching. And this is even compounded as the story goes along. Admittedly, the first half of the show wasn't really too compelling to me. I think it looked good, the characters were fun, but it really didn't do anything truly compelling to me until the second half. And that's again where I think it sets itself aside from something like Idoly Pride. Whereas again, Idoly Pride was so much focused on the past stories, which I think was phenomenal, which was what was made it so great. This one became so focused on the current time and the current characters and what these girls are going to do in the future. Because it becomes more about the characters and their futures versus the selection project itself. And again, less focused on Akari, who was the inspiration. And I was actually very surprised with what they did with that. I think the futures of these characters and how they turn things around for themselves going forward was essentially the selling point for me in the end, and what ultimately made me enjoy this show, because it became an underdog story that I personally connect with. This idea of not really having too much stardom and struggling to build yourself up from the ground up. And the willingness for the writer to almost have that reset ultimately made me more connected with the characters. I wanted to see them succeed, and I really did feel their struggle. So yes, while the first half was my struggle, and I think a lot of that had to do with it being sold as a reality TV show, and now while they have the reality TV show moments, like they have this whole kind of round table discussion moment with cameras around them, and they have this drama kind of building up, it wasn't really as much as I was hoping. Like early on, I was expecting, okay, these girls are gonna be at each other's throats, you're gonna have these moments in the rooms where they're bickering about each other, one-on-one competitions, but they never really did that. But despite that, it turned things around, and it did some really good stuff with these characters, and in the end, I really did love them. And that gets me into the music. I absolutely love the music in this show. Similar to Idoly Pride, I think this is, a step in an interesting direction for a lot of idol shows. Typically, it's always kind of like group pop and they're all, dancing together and each one gets their turn. But I think this one was doing something very unique because it had them kind of group up. They each had their own style. And I love the music that came of it, especially Suzune and Rena's song. I kept listening to it over and over again. It's such a good song. Now, granted, they use CGI in their performances, which is unfortunate, but I think it's just kind of I don't think we're ever going to get away from that. It looked good. And at the same time, it kind of has a similar issue as Idoly Pride, where when it gets more kind of a darker setting and lighting, you can kind of see it a lot more. But again, the music was really good. I really loved all the music in the show. And again, I think Doug Okobo did a great job on the series. It's not as the polished degree that I usually typically love out of Doug Okobo, but a lot of the characters look great, and they kept them on model for most part. But overall, like I said, I really did enjoy this series. I think it hit on enough really solid concepts. Like I said, grouping the characters and hitting on them individually as a group was really great. That kind of connection that a lot of these characters could make because they were grouped together was phenomenal. And like I said, I think they did some really good stuff with Suzune and Rena. Despite my not liking the Rena archetype, which is the long black-haired girl that thinks everything needs to be super serious and we're rivals kind of character, they did some cool stuff with her later on. I think out of all the Rena-type characters in Idol show, this was the one that I think I connected to the most. You really did kind of see that struggle and that turning point for her as a character as she realized, why was she there? Who is she as a person, and does she really want to be there? But yeah, that's my thoughts on Selection Project. Like I said, it was a rocky road getting to that point, but I think once it got there and it really kind of shifted the narrative away from here's the norm to what we're doing with the story, I think it really did surprise me. I was absolutely surprised by what they end up doing with the story. I end up getting, like I said, very much into the characters. I rooted for them. I wanted them to succeed. And I really think it comes along with that idea of building from the ground up that I think a lot of people, including myself, can relate to. That not everything's going to be handed to, and do you really want it handed to, or do you want to build it yourself? And I think that was in the end, the great story this thing offered. But that's my review of Selection Project. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like down below, comment, let me know what you thought of the series, if you're going to check it out. Do you agree with me? Do you think this did enough to kind of set itself aside from something like Idoly Pride? Subscribe if you haven't already, share this video if you can, support us on Patreon through the tips link in the description below. We definitely appreciate everybody that does, and y'all take care.